The first thing you're going to learn about intellection on the very top is that long description. When you think about intellection, you think about somebody who just loves to think. A couple of the words that jump out to me in that long description: you like exercising the muscles of your brain, stretching them in multiple directions. This need for mental activity might be focused, as if you're solving a specific problem or thinking about a specific idea, but it might very well lack focus. Intellection by itself really is just the enjoyment of the process of thinking. I think people with high intellection are generally known as quite introspective, as thoughtful, as people who could be many times completely entertained by what's going on in their brain. And I just love the value in that. I think about what it brings on an enhanced perspective, a deeper level of consideration than other people probably ever even get to. Just really defining it here, the theme of intellection does not dictate what you're thinking about. It simply describes that you like to think. A lot of words we think about with intellection, I like the word musing, reflection. Wherever it leads you, this mental hum is one of the constants of your life. What a beautiful theme. It does fall into that strategic thinking domain, which we are, I think, more than halfway through now. Just a few more to go as we go domain by domain. And those domains really are answering the question of, how do leaders lead? And so I want to talk intellection specifically to what it looks like in a leader. So if an individual with intellection might say, I bring greater awareness to the ideas that I spend time musing, a leader might point that a little bit more and say, I provide deeper consideration and perspective to the challenges facing my team or the challenges facing my organization. Now, while the core of this theme really is about processing, not producing necessarily, the value of this theme really might bring to leadership, the reality of how do you use this in a leader might come on what happens after that intellection has been the star of the show. So I think there's two important questions for leaders with intellection to ask themselves. One is, how do you do your best thinking? Think about, what's your best thought incubator? Do you think alone? Do you think in groups? Do you think with a lot of research and a lot of data? Input shows up very often. It is the most common to show up with somebody who has intellection in your top 5. So if that theme is something that's feeding it, how are you finding what you're musing about? Your other themes really are going to dictate probably how you do your best thinking, but also consider just times when ideas have become really clear to you. It's that idea of broaden and build upon success that strengths-based coaching is really focused on. So study how you do your best thinking. The second question I'd love for leaders with intellection to consider is, what's your best avenue for sharing your awareness? Leaders with intellection really bring greater awareness. It's not necessarily control. It's not necessarily confidence. It's not necessarily doubt. It is just that heightened understanding. So consider, again, your other themes, consider your best partnerships, consider your best successes that you've had perhaps in the past, and look for how you best get that awareness out of your head, out of your really muscly brain, and into the hearts and minds of others. Typically, somebody with intellection takes time to muse, to consider, to introspect, if that's a verb. I think you need to perhaps introduce this need for time, as well as the benefit of having the time. It's not just that you're going to think slower than everyone else. It's that your brain is going to go different places that other people's won't. And so ask for information, demonstrate thoughtful consideration, allow people to take a peek at what they get when you have that time to muse. If you need to ask for time to think, that's a great thing to ask for. And maybe you might come at it from the standpoint of, hey, if I can consider this and have a little bit of time to mull this over, I think I can bring us a perspective that perhaps we would have missed, or that will make the answer impeccably clear for everyone. I was listening this morning to season 1 of Intellection, and it's fantastic. It's, first of all, Jim, it's really expertly produced. There's some really great production quality. And I, again, was pleasantly surprised and reminded of how easy it is to access these. So I'm an Apple person. I just went to the podcast app and typed Theme Thursday Intellection, and I could choose already from 2 seasons, but season 1 was where I went. And we got to hear Steve Crabtree talk about his intellection. And this week, jump forward a few years, I got to hear Steve Crabtree talk about the Gallup's new release of the State of the American Workplace. And so I had an idea of who this guy was, but hearing him talk about his intellection gave it a different dimension. And one of the things that it inspired me to do was to learn more. So I went to my favorite resource. It's here somewhere on my desk, the Clifton Strengths Resource Guide. One of the things in there is a couple statements about each theme. I love, I need, I bring. One of the statements is I hate. So as I was prepping this for you, I wanted to read you exactly what it says about intellection there. I hate a thoughtless approach to anything. Think about a leader with intellection. If that's true for you, if you do hate a thoughtless approach to anything, it might be more about how you approach. It might mean that you really hate being unprepared and that your best preparation is to exercise your thought muscle. It might also mean that you expect other people are thoughtful. So I think it's a lot of the way that high intellection gets to thoughtfulness is by considering the theoretical side of things that set stage for the practical. So make sure you have ways to feed and explore theory so that you feel confident when you're leading, confident when you're making those decisions, and perhaps finding the root cause or a root theory or even just a diverse opinion is something that you can help other people do. And think about using that intellection almost in a relationship building standpoint, really helping folks be more thoughtful in their approach to daily tasks and to big challenges. The unique thing about being a leader and being a manager especially is that you've got multi-directional stakeholders. I got to teach the Accelerated Strengths Coaching course last week. It was really fun. I don't teach it quite often enough. But one of the pieces that we talk about is what's different in coaching a manager versus an individual contributor. And we drew on a flip chart this great idea of who all has a stake in a manager's success. If you think about a beautifully drawn stick person in the middle of a flip chart, you really can have arrows that go in absolutely every direction, thinking about that manager's team, that manager's peers, that manager's leadership, even the people who maybe answer to that team, whether that's team members that they themselves have or their family or their community members. And it's a really unique position to need to have stakeholders in so many directions. So I think another thing, a great muscle for leaders with intellection to flex is making sure you've got diverse opinions that you can listen to. It will feed your thought engine, and I think it'll make your musing all the more complex. And for somebody with intellection, that kind of complexity is like the best dessert you could ever order. The last thing I want to talk about is those 4 needs of followers. How could a leader with intellection build trust, compassion, stability, and hope? First up is trust. Think about communicating your process. If you need to say, hey, I'm going to think about this, or I've been considering this. Sometimes it might be retroactive, being able to explain that you did give thoughtful preparation to an idea. And it could be something as simple as, hey, I've been considering this for a while, or I've talked to a lot of people about this. I also think, how can you muse invitations, or how can you merge sort of invitations to thought in what you communicate? Something like, hey, what do you think about this? And allowing people in while you're still churning and still considering ideas. A leader with intellection might show compassion by focusing that churn or those musings on individual people. You could demonstrate a deep awareness by really getting into and understanding the perspective for each individual. You might even think about the individual folks on your team as being different theme parks that your brain could visit. And there's so many different facets, such a complex array of things to be thought about that it's probably endlessly provocative for your brain. And when you demonstrate, again, that back to each individual, it really does show that you care. It might be how intellection really demonstrates compassion and love. A leader with intellection might provide stability by studying past current and future theories that apply to the challenges your team is facing, and offering the connections that you see. We talk quite a bit in our strategic thinking domain about some of those time themes. So context is going to get clues from the past. Futuristic is going to hear clues from the future. Adaptability sometimes in that relationship building domain is going to really focus on the present. I think in many ways, an election spans all of those. And really, it's looking not just at what's currently happening, but what's a theory behind it or what's a root cause behind it. And there seems to be an element of an election that can connect some of those thoughts, much like ideation can connect disparate thoughts. I think intellection can do it on a deeper, perhaps more academic level, and offering those connections can certainly help people see either, wow, this is really tough and here's how somebody else has gotten through it, or wow, this is really tough and we've been through it before, or hey, this is really tough and our theory would suggest it's going to be tough for a while. It's perhaps less creative than ideation in that way, maybe more dispassionate and closer to analytical, but certainly a beautiful gift that you can offer in the neck of stability. And finally, we get to talk hope. My favorite phrase for how somebody with intellection who's a leader could provide hope to your followers is muse and diffuse. So we get to talk to Cheryl, who also has harmony, which in many cases is how do I diffuse and find consensus? But intellection by itself can do that too. How do you invite people to consider alternatives that might help broaden their lens of where they're going? Hope is about believing that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And what better way to help people do that than invite them into a thought process? I think what you can do with an election is you can say, I know where we are right now isn't as good as where we're going to be. And you might find lots of different avenues that you can help people sort of explore that. And again, it's not necessarily about having the right answer. It's about the exploration. That's really, I think, the beauty, the power of intellection.